Great.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for exploring the mind-body connection through food, movement, and mental health. My name is Vanessa Oliver, and I'm a registered dietitian with UKHR Health and Wellness. I'm joined today by Dr. Carrie Davidson, who is an exercise specialist and fitness guru with UKHR Health and Wellness, and Eric Wilkinson from Work Life Mental Health, and he is a licensed clinical social worker, and he will be also sharing some positive psychology strategies with us today. So those of you who are here, if you want to go on and put your name in the chat and just say hello. That goes a long way in helping us take attendance for this presentation. So if you have the ability to just go on and put your name or just say hi in the chat, we really do appreciate that very much. So thank you. All right, I'm going to get started since we've got a jam-packed presentation today. Just to show you what the outline of today's presentation will be. We'll talk first about nutrition, so that's my area, and how it affects food and emotions. And we'll get into some juiciness there about defining interoception, which is a fancy word that we'll all know more about at the end of today, how food choice and meal timing can affect it, as well as some general nutrition tips and potential strategies. Then we'll transition to Carrie with exercise and stress and rebuilding or building for the first time neural pathways with exercise. And then we'll go on to Eric with some positive psychology interventions. Okay, so interoceptive awareness. Believe it or not, it is your superpower, okay? It's everybody's superpower. And what it means really, it's a fancy word for noticing and processing physical sensations. Now, hunger and thirst are two examples of interoceptive awareness, as are feeling hot or cold, whether you can feel your heart rate become more rapid or slow down, even needing to urinate, okay? These are all related to interoceptive awareness. And all of these are equal, right? A lot of time, you wouldn't stop yourself from, needing to pee, right? But a lot of us stop ourselves from eating regularly. And really what we should do is realize that those two signals are equal in importance for telling us what our bodies need. We often override our body's needs and wants due to a lot of things, okay? Maybe it's a history of dieting and restriction, maybe it's a history of trauma, maybe it's specific mental or physical health conditions, maybe it's time and money, stress, lack of knowledge, but all of these can add up to a lack of trust in our body's signals. And this can really affect the mind-body connection when it comes to food and nutrition. When we have this history of override, you feel like you'll just get to it later, or you feel like eating's just not important, or hydrating's not important, okay? But particular health conditions can really mess with our interoception, right? Some particular health conditions that have more to do with the mental health space that can affect this mind-body connection when it comes to food and nutrition could be ADHD, right? A lot of folks are recognizing that they may have some tendencies toward ADHD, and maybe you've just gotten or learned a little bit more about that, right? Someone with ADHD might hyper-focus on something external from themselves, which can lead to less awareness of internal cues, right? You might be using a medication that impacts your appetite, which further skews these interoceptive cues. People who have autism, right? It's a sensitivity where there's a potential for a high sensitivity to interoception. Maybe you pay a lot of attention to what's going on the inside, or a low sensitivity to interoception. Maybe there's just too many battling signals, right? And so you might either seek or avoid particular sensory stimulations depending on that individual. You might have extremely intense hunger or fullness cues and awareness of digestion. This can also happen with a history of trauma where the fight or flight response has constantly been triggered. You might tend toward being very highly sensitive in terms of your mind-body awareness, or You might perceive cues as a threat and push those cues away. Okay, this can also happen with a history of eating disorder or disordered eating, where these internal cues of hunger and fullness are going to be fully disrupted by this disorder. And that can really not only affect your behaviors around food and drink, but can also affect the digestive process. Believe it or not, that can become more complicated when it comes to connecting to hunger or fullness. So you can really see how there are a lot of reasons why our interoceptive awareness might not be working as ideally as we hope. All right, so we want to look at how we can process these signals into choices that meet our needs and whether or not we can use particular nutritional strategies to build support. Okay, now when it comes to food choices and this mind-body connection, listening to these food cues, there can be particular food choices that can either support or hinder interoception. So choosing foods that are full of complex carbohydrates, such as whole grains, whole fruits and vegetables, dairy if you can tolerate it, these are all going to be the strongest sources of complex carbohydrates in the diet. These can support interoception because they are our brain's preferred source of fuel. They break down to glucose, our brain runs well on glucose, and this can help us with not only food decision making, but really life decision making, right? So if you've ever severely restricted your carbohydrates for any time and noticed that you have brain fog, those two things are connected. All right, proteins and vegetables, they can help slow down the digestion of some of our other foods, which can help regulate our blood sugar. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but I like to use the analogy of a helium balloon versus a hot air balloon, right? And if any of you have had consults with me before, I know you're nodding along because I know I've probably said this to you before. But essentially, when you let go of a helium balloon, you can float straight up, right? You can see it just go up into the stratosphere, and then it's going to go up and up and up, and eventually it's going to pop. And that is like eating a simple carb by itself without any protein or fiber or fat to back it up. Okay, so that could be like just plain saltines. All right, but a hot air balloon, if you can envision that, it goes up a little bit more slowly, right? It travels further, and then it comes down more gently. And that's like your blood sugar when you are pairing these foods together, when you're eating fiber, when you're eating protein, when you're eating fats. It's going to help your blood sugar go up because your blood sugar is supposed to go up after you eat, but it's going to help you maintain that more regular blood sugar measurement, which means more consistent energy, less fatigue, and not that crash when you end up digesting all of that food and using all of that energy. On the contrary, some foods that are very high in sugar, some foods that are ultra processed, which means that they contain ingredients that you wouldn't normally find in your kitchen, and then foods that contain a lot of caffeine, and then alcohol, which, believe it or not, is a macronutrient. All of these can interfere with your interoception and make you less likely to recognize these internal cues. So these are the kinds of foods that you would want to choose less often if you were trying to improve this mind-body awareness. Then food timing, right? We want to think about this as well. Now, this is just really based on liver biology and energy storage, but our livers can hold enough energy for about 4 or 5 hours, and then it's kind of time for us to eat. For some people, it's a little bit less. For some people, it's a little bit more, but that's really the average. So if you find yourself regularly going 6, 7, 8 hours without eating, that might be a strategy that you can look at changing if you want to improve this mind-body connection, okay? Also combining those macronutrients, like I mentioned, proteins, fats, complex carbs for that blood sugar stability, and instituting that consistent pattern of eating is really going to help you become more aware of these hunger fullness signals, more aware of how foods affect you, energy levels, etc. Okay, and again, it's going to help you rebuild trust between your mind and your body. If you have gone a long time stuffing down hunger signals, for example, or not being able to hear fullness signals when you eat, this consistent pattern of eating and either instituting it for the first time or reinstituting it if it's been a while can help you rebuild that trust back with your body. If I can say this once, I'll say it 100 times, hunger is not the enemy, all right? It's a natural biological cue that lets you know that you need energy. It's your body's way of communicating its needs for survival, and waiting too long to eat can trigger a primal hunger, which often results in overeating, right? Think about it. If you've put off eating all day, all day, all day, all day, and then you get home and you're starving and you just can't understand why, right? You've reached that moment of excessive hunger when all intentions of moderate or conscious eating are just off the table. And using tricks to like not eat when you're actually biologically hungry is really going to lead to an inability to listen to and trust your body. Okay, so hunger is not a symptom to overcome. It's not shameful. It's necessary for life. And your body needs to know consistently that it's going to have access to food that is satisfying and nutrient rich. So what do nutrient rich foods look like? Okay, I've got some ideas here coming up in the next couple slides, as well as some general healthful patterns to try to incorporate. And there is no reason to do all of these at once. Choose one that speaks to you and go from there. And we want to look at words that add food to our day, right? Not taking away. So we're adding leafy green vegetables, maybe some spinach to scrambled eggs or lettuce to sandwiches. Maybe we're choosing whole grain options when we're able. It doesn't have to be whole grain pasta all the time. I hate whole grain pasta, but I am going to choose some whole grain bread or brown rice because I like that. Okay. Use canned or tinned seafood as a more affordable option if you're looking to incorporate fish into your into your diet for omega-3s and lean protein. Maybe opt for nuts or fruit or hummus or veggies as a snack more often than chips or sweets or crackers. Increase your intake of beans or legumes and lentils for that fiber and a plant-based protein choice. Enjoy more antioxidant-rich foods, adding color to oatmeal or smoothies to salads. And again, notice that this advice focuses on adding, not subtracting. There are a lot of low effort, easier ways to incorporate these foods into your day. Maybe some plain yogurt, maybe some frozen vegetables, maybe some fresh, dried, or frozen fruits, maybe canned beans or shelf-stable whole grains. But all of these are going to help you balance your blood sugar and pay more attention to those internal signals, all right? It's about increasing your overall quality of your consumption pattern, looking at intentional consumption of fruits and vegetables, okay? If that common wisdom of 5 a day fruits and vegetables sounds really scary to you, don't feel like you got to go from 0 to 5 all at once, all right? Start with 1 more serving of vegetable than you're currently doing. Same thing with fish twice a week. Sometimes people are like, oh my God, no, I hate fish. I can't do it. That's okay. It's a suggestion. Are there other ways that you can increase your protein and your omega-3s? Can you focus on that balance of protein and fiber and fat at meals? And don't overlook the power of connection either. Can you share meals with family and friends when able? This is also going to help with that mind-body connection when it comes to food, all right? We are going to just briefly go over this next slide, which has just a few more potential strategies. We've talked about including protein in your major meals to help regulate blood sugar. If you feel like hunger cues are just non-existent right now, mechanical eating can help you eat even if you're not hungry when you are trying to establish a more regular eating pattern. And that looks like maybe setting a calendar alert or even an alarm on your phone, okay? And that's just to get you into that pattern of eating more regularly. Maybe using a menu rotation, like planning your meals for a certain period, like 3 weeks worth of breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and repeating those meals over and over. This allows you to plan once and then forget about meal planning for months, really. Choosing simple but nutritious meal options, If any of you have been following my colleague Karen's Lazy Dietitian series, her web series that she's been doing on YouTube, she's got tons of examples of being able to put together foods that really, or meals rather, just take assembly and not cooking. And then anchor habits, component cooking, and those acute reminders are a few more strategies that you can use to build that mind-body connection. Now I'm going to turn this over to Carrie so she can continue with exercise, stress, and the mind-body connection.
Hello. Yes, we'll get to all the questions in the chat. So as they pop up for you, please put your questions in the chat and we'll definitely get to those toward the end. That word that Vanessa just introduced you to is true across the board. It's going to be the same for nutrition as it is for exercise, as it is for some of the strategies that Eric is going to talk about. It's really about paying attention to the signals that your body has. Whether that's, hey, I need to stretch, I need to move, or I need to eat, or I need to go to the bathroom. All of those are signals that our bodies are giving to us. And so it's mindful. It's paying attention on purpose to those signals. And there are certain things that we should not ignore, right? And that's what Vanessa was talking about. And the same holds true for movement and exercise. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of information here on some of the mind-body connection. As we exercise, as exercise increases, that's what the arrow up is for, then our brain starts to release a lot of these feel-good hormones, endorphins, serotonin, opioid, and BDNF protein. So endorphins help us to combat pain, right? So just like we shouldn't overlook hunger, we shouldn't overlook pain either. If you're doing an exercise and it's starting to hurt, that is our body's way of saying, whoa, stop. This is not a no pain, no gain situation. Do not work through the pain, right? So our body wants homeostasis all the time. Our body wants balance, whether that's nutritionally, sleep, physical health, all the ways, right? Our body wants homeostasis. Our mind wants homeostasis. And so the more that we exercise, the more endorphins we release, the more serotonin we release. And serotonin is really that mood enhancer, right? So that feel-good chemical. Opioids, BDNF, these are all chemicals that help us to learn, that help us to feel good, that help us to recover and repair cells. So all of the things that we want and that our body is trying to achieve can be had here as we increase the amount of exercise that we have. I can't advance the slide, Vanessa. There we go. Thank you. As we begin to increase our exercise, and I'm going to give you some strategies here in just a minute for being able to do that, we do have less stress in our life. And I know this ebbs and flows, and sometimes we feel like we've got it and we're on top of it. And sometimes it feels so overwhelming that we can't put one foot in front of the other. So this is where repetition and habit really come in handy. If we already have a habit of movement, if we already have a habit of exercise, then when those moments come, then we go on autopilot of, I know I need to move. I know I need to exercise, and that's going to be helpful. So stress reduction, and that's the next one, just a fancy word for reducing anxiety, mood elevation, reduced pain perception because of those chemicals that are released in the brain, depression, stress response, self-esteem, body image, all of these are, I'm going to call them side effects, side effects of exercise. So we know already, right? We already know exercise helps us to manage our weight and our blood pressure and our muscle tone and our flexibility and our cardiovascular health. We know those things, but sometimes it's the brain side effects of exercise, also known as benefits, that we don't always keep at the top of mind whenever it comes to things like exercise. And so I'm going to give you just a few examples here in just a minute, but what I want you to understand is that these three things are related. We're not a body over here and a mind over here and a spirit over here, right? We're all these conglomeration of all the things at all the time. So what happens in our body is also happening in our brain, and then that is producing some biochemistry that's going to change our behavior in one direction or another, which then affects our brain, which then affects our biochemistry. So it is cyclical, but it's also interrelated, right? So if some piece of that is off, it throws off the whole balance of our brain biochemistry and behavior. So a good example of this is you don't sleep well at night. Maybe the night before you had some really spicy food or something that causes you indigestion or some digestive upset, right? And so if you just look at, oh man, I woke up really tired, I didn't sleep well, I don't feel like getting up to exercise, maybe we go back, it's because of something that we had in our diet the night before. Maybe not, right? But all of these things are related, and we can't look at one by itself. We have to look at all of them. So we can't just say, oh, the problem is I'm tired. Well, maybe the problem isn't really that we're tired. Maybe the problem goes upstream just a little bit. So what are we talking about when we talk about exercise? What are we looking at as far as what are the goals? What are we trying to achieve here? You can go ahead and advance. Yes, that slide. Thank you. So the American College of Sports Medicine puts forth guidelines for all three modalities of exercise. And you guys have probably heard this time and time again. The cardiovascular recommendations from the ACSM, 30 minutes, moderate intensity, 5 days a week, or you get the same health benefits, 3 days a week, 20 minutes vigorous. So what's the difference? The difference is in how hard you're exercising. It's your intensity. And I am here to say that, yes, I oversee all things physical activity related here for our employee wellness, and I absolutely want you to join the gym, but I am also here to say that it doesn't have to be an hour in the gym every day. I don't go to the gym for an hour every day, not to work out, maybe to work, but not to work out, right? And that's what I'm telling you. So 30 minutes of moderate intensity might mean that you choose a parking spot further away than you normally would. So it takes you 10 minutes to walk into your office, which means it's going to take you 10 minutes to walk out back to your car at the end of the day. And that's 20 minutes. So if you walk to a meeting or you walk to lunch or you just take a walk for 10 minutes, you've got 30 minutes of accumulated moderate intensity exercise. So also, besides having all of it pushed together, which again is fine, but maybe not realistic for everyone, if we were to space out that exercise, then we keep those brain hormones at a more consistent level, right? Just like we don't want to not eat for very long periods of time, we don't want to not exercise for very long periods of time. And the research now is showing us that we have better health outcomes if we move more often during the day, as opposed to sitting for 23 hours a day. But we go to the gym for 1 hour, we work really hard and we sweat. Those people do not have as good of health outcomes as the people who never go to the gym, but they're active all day long. So it keeps those brain chemicals, and therefore our choices and our behaviors, it keeps them more even keel, right? So Vanessa's talking about our nutrition keeping even keel, and so exercise is the same way. So I don't want us to feel like, man, there's something else on my to-do list, one more box I have to check, now I got to go to the gym, now I got to exercise, now I got to do this. It doesn't have to be that way. So we are really, really good. We got really creative over the pandemic, and it was really a good thing. It was one of the silver linings that we saw, is that people came up with really creative ways, and we were challenging ourselves to come up with really creative ways to get more exercise in when all the gyms were closed and the public parks were closed. So I have a lot of strategies. I have a lot of tricks in my pocket. So I'll see if we have some time to get through some of those today, but if not, you can always schedule a consult and we can talk about that. Resistance training, those guidelines for the ACSM are really generic because it's going to depend on your goal. So if you are here to lose weight, it's going to be on one side. If you're here to be able to lift really heavy things, that's really the opposite side of the spectrum, right? So the guidelines are pretty generic because it tries to encompass all the goals. So 2 to 3 sets, 8 to 12 reps, major muscle groups, most days of the week, 2 to 3 times a week. So that's really generic. And I'm going to put that into some more functional terms for you on the next slide in just a second. So resistance training just means anytime we're moving a force against resistance. This might be a squat at the gym, but it also might be lifting a bag of mulch or a 50-pound bag of dog food, or a ream of paper in the office. Resistance training is any force against a resistance, pushing things, pulling things. And so we need to keep our muscles strong. We need to keep our bones strong, and we do that through resistance training, right? Cardiovascular exercise is what it says. It's for the heart and lungs, and resistance training is for muscles, bones, ligaments, tendons, very, very grossly, right? It's for it. Like I said, you can't really separate, but that's what that piece is for. Flexibility and mobility, we're talking about taking a joint through its full range of motion. And I don't know about you, but raising my arms over my head is not something I do every day on a regular basis. Washing my hair and brushing my hair, that's it. Otherwise, my arms don't go over my head. And you'll notice in our elderly population that is one of the things that goes first. Shoulder range of motion is what goes first because we just don't do it. So just moving our body through its full range of motion, every joint, it might take you a few minutes to get all the joints through their full range of motion. And like I said, I wish I had the whole hour here. I could, make sure that we're doing all of those things. It doesn't take long at all. I actually have some videos on our YouTube channel, the same place that Karen's are for the Lazy Dietitian, for doing just that. But in general, ACSM guidelines for flexibility and mobility, major muscle groups, 3 times 30 seconds, 5 days a week. So move. And I like to lump in here with our flexibility and mobility. I like to lump in here standing. If you already have a standing desk, that's fantastic. Sit part of the time. If you sit all the day, then stand part of the day. If you have a ball, sit on that part of the day. It's about changing your position and moving around so that we're constantly taxing our bodies in different ways. It needs to be a change. It needs to be constant. And, exercise is really stress, that it's work. And so we have to make our bodies work in order to get them stronger, in order to build them up, right? And so one of the things that we talk about is muscle memory. And you probably have heard this term before. It's like riding a bike. It just comes right back. That's what we're talking about. When we create neural pathways, when we do something over and over and over again, we've created a neural pathway, and then that signal moves really efficiently from the brain to the body. It moves really efficiently through that neural pathway so that it just becomes second nature. Like driving to work. You've done it now, the same path, the same route, so that by the time you get there, you're like, I don't remember passing the airport. I don't remember passing this, right? Things you normally do because it's become such second nature. So 2 things that we want to do is, one is we want to create that mindful awareness. Yes, we want to create mindful awareness so that we are present with everything that's happening. As we're driving to work, noticing the things that we're passing, as we're working, noticing our hunger cues, as we're working or moving throughout our day, noticing that we need to move our body around, that maybe our brain is getting a little sluggish. It's time to do some exercise. It's time to give it some fuel, whatever that might be. And so repetition is the key to good habits, just like it's the key to bad habits. And if we're constantly moving in autopilot, we don't have that awareness. But if we can change the patterns to good patterns, then we're in a better space for creating those good habits. So we call those neural pathways, and they can be changed. Think about a ditch, right? And something is constantly flowing down that ditch. And in order to create a new neural pathway, we want to fill in that ditch and build a new one beside it. So that it might take a little bit of time and it might take a little bit of effort, but that's what we want to do to create a new neural pathway. So it can be for good, or it can be for something a little bit more challenging. All right, I'm going to take just 1 minute to quickly go through some functional movements, things that you do every day. Every single day, we sit down and stand up. I would venture to guess everybody in this Zoom room, and there's like 86 people in this Zoom room right now, that we all stand up and sit down every day. And you want to continue to be able to stand up and sit down if that's something that involves sitting at your desk, sitting in your car, sitting in the bathroom, sitting at your kitchen table. You want to continue to be able to stand up and sit down. That's a very functional movement. And in gym terms, we call that a squat. You want to be able to continue to push things, push yourself away from the desk or pull yourself back to the desk, push a door open or pull a door open, a push and a pull. We fancy words call this a bench press and a row. These are very functional movements. And again, pushing things overhead or pulling things down. Maybe you want to reach up to your full range of motion and put a glass away up in the tallest level of the cabinet. Maybe you want to close the trunk of your car and pull things down. This is a push and a pull in a different plane, but fancy. We call it overhead press and lat pull. So just by moving these 4 ways with the arms, and then it's standing up and sitting down, those are our basic 5. Ideally, we have a few extra movement patterns in there, but those are our basic 5. That's the things that we do every single day. We push grocery carts, we push strollers, we push kids in swings, we pull things, we push things up overhead and we pull things. We stand up and we sit down. Those are the main 5. So I'm running over my time. I'm going to hush and let Eric talk. But if this spurs questions for you, then please put them in the chat and we'll make sure that we get them toward the end.
All right. Well, thank you. So I want to talk just briefly about kind of what positive psychology is. Positive psychology was a movement largely that started in the 1990s, where there was a recognition that most of psychology research and psychiatry focused on mental health disorders, negative emotions, basically trying to understand human beings when things are not going well. And so with positive psychology, there's this shift in focus to wanting to focus more on positive emotions and what brings about positive emotions and positive experiences. There's a really famous book, Authentic Happiness by Martin Seligman. And in that book, he mapped out different kind of dimensions of that his research indicated were important for psychological well-being. And he used the acronym PERMA, PERMA. The P stands for positive emotions, just this mindful awareness of what brings about positive emotions and how we can intentionally engage in behaviors that are going to do that. The E in PERMA stands for engagement. This recognition that it's important as human beings that we know that we have activities that are naturally engaging, things where we can kind of lose our sense of time, where we can really immerse ourselves in it. The R in PERMA stands for relationships. At our core, we're social beings. I think about, there's many aspects that are universal across human beings, but first and foremost, we all have the desire to love and to be loved. And so relationships are really important. The quality of our relationships are really important. The M in PERMA stands for meaning. So knowing what you value, kind of like what's important to you beyond just the day-to-day responsibilities that you have. What allows you to feel fulfilled? What allows you to feel connected to something bigger than yourself? In that meaning area, this is very much values-based as well as kind of spirituality-based. And then the A in PERMA is achievement. It's a recognition that as human beings, um, we all want to live lives where we experience, pursuing and achieving goals, where we experience competence and skill development. So there's this focus on these different ways to enhance psychological well-being. But I think underlying all this is kind of refers back to something that both Vanessa and Carrie were talking about, which is that as human beings, Paul Gilbert, the evolutionary psychologist, talks about how we have a threat defense system, which gets a lot of attention. That's our fight, flight, or freeze response. But we also have a mammalian caregiving system. And when we think about positive psychology and the positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, all of these things are activating our mammalian caregiving system. Um, Vanessa, can you advance the next slide? In order to understand, what kind of relationships are meaningful to us, what kind of life activities are engaging, what kind of experiences bring us joy and happiness, this really gets at what do we value. And so we're going to share these slides. One of the activities I often do with clients is have them look at a list of values like the values on the screen you're looking at right now. And to identify, and I think it's important to note that while we usually have some values that are pretty consistent through our life, but we also have values that come and go or that change in their level of significance, importance based on where we are in our life. And so for this activity, you would look at this list of values and you would try to identify maybe a top 10 values, and then also maybe even your top 3 values. And after you identify it, it's important to actually define what the value means to you. So if you were to identify family, for example, as one of your top 10 or top 3 values, to say, when I'm actually living in a way that's consistent to honoring the value of family, what does this look like? Does that mean that I am, is it about spending quality time with family? Does that mean I'm attending family reunions? Does that mean that I'm calling grandparents to check on them? Does that mean that I'm providing financial support to family members with less means? Really understanding, if I'm practicing the value of family, what does that look like? And so when you get the slides, I would encourage you to take some time, kind of read through this list and see if you could come up with a top 10, see if you can come up with a top 3, and then actually define for yourself what it looks like in your life when you're living that value. Okay, next slide. Embedded in kind of a positive psychology perspective is that this idea of radical self-care. And that language is not always used within positive psychology, but I think there's a lot of benefits to conceptualizing self-care this way. Often self-care is seen as something that we do when we're on vacation, or when we're done working, or on the weekend. Sometimes it's seen as like going to get a massage, or treating ourselves in some way. Radical self-care is this idea that of paying attention how we relate to ourselves, our experiences, which includes our experiences with our external environment, as well as kind of our internal experiences, our thoughts and emotions, paying attention to how we interact with the world at large. And the focus is on supporting our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health in everything we do. In other words, trying to bring caring practices in all aspects of our life, and knowing that it's grounded in our values, so that what's important to me is represented in how I live my life when I'm with family or friends, but it's also what's important to me. My value system is also reflected on in how I conduct myself at work. Nicole and Yee in 2017, they had a definition. I've linked the article where you can read the definition in entirety of radical self-care, but there's this reflection, or there's this emphasis on reflecting and identifying your core values, knowing what's important to you. There's also this viewpoint that we're all on our own life journey. Like we're all constantly changing and growing. So we're not finished products. Um, there's an emphasis on mindful, intentional choices about resources. The line that they have in their definition is how we make choices about allocating time, money, and energy for ourselves personally, at home, and at work. There is attention to our engagement with the social and ecological world, how we engage in our nested, interconnected worlds. So how we interact with a coworker, how we interact with a family member, how we interact with a stranger on the street, also how we interact with animals and other living beings. And then finally, there's this emphasis on the having the bravery to be different. Like there's a lot of pressure in our world to conform to the expectations that others have, or to kind of minimize what makes us unique or an individual. And so part of radical self-care is knowing what is true to you, and having the bravery to express that, even if it makes you kind of stand out or be different. Okay, next slide. When we think about how our values can be relevant to kind of the mind-body connection, I think it's important to consider, what do I value in relationships? Relationships with other people, other living beings, our relationship with the planet, and thinking about, how do I spend my energy? How do I act towards the world and towards others? Knowing what you value in relationships, and then trying to implement it. Paying attention to what we value about our physical body. A lot of folks that come see me come because they're feeling overwhelmed with anxiety or depression, and I often just will check in to see what's their sleep like. And for a lot of folks, they're not sleeping, but sometimes it's because there's some kind of mental disorder that's interfering, or some kind of health condition. But a lot of times, folks are not sleeping because they're just not valuing sleep. They feel like sleep is, a privilege, or sleep is something that's less important than other things in their life. If we don't value sleep, we're not going to prioritize sleep. If we don't value, physical movement, we're not going to, or less likely to engage in intentional physical movement. Knowing what brings you meaning and purpose, like what is really meaningful to you, and then saying, how can I um, kind of integrate this in my life? How can I make sure that that I'm spending significant time and energy on the things that are most meaningful? Thinking about what you value in terms of play or fun or leisure. Sometimes folks will just default to, like when they have downtime, to play. That's just kind of what they grew up with. I have folks that will tell me, I really love to draw or paint, but I've not done that in years. And so kind of like coming back to, like, what do I, when I have time for fun or play, how do I want to use that time? Being aware of trying to align our work with our values. There can be dignity in almost all types of work. So it's great if we have some kind of career that really directly reflects our values, but also how we conduct ourselves in the work that we do can be an expression of our values. And then finally, knowing what kind of resources, do we value financial resources? Do we value, like, um, you know, quality time or downtime? Do we value large social networks? What kind of resources do we value, and how can we bring more of that into our lives? Okay, next slide. Kelly McGonigal, I've linked to the TED Talk. There's a really great TED Talk in here where she talks about, um, with extensive survey research, they were looking at the relationship between stress and morbidity and mortality, illness and death. And not surprising, people that reported higher levels of stress, had higher levels of illness and death. But what was surprising in the research was that an even stronger indicator for health and for longevity was the way people thought about stress. If people were able to think about stress not as something that often we think about stress that there's something wrong with us, or I'm doing something wrong, or this is a threat. Folks that have kind of a negative view on stress are more likely to have these adverse health outcomes. Folks that saw stress as this is just part of being human, or this is part of the work that I choose to do, my career, I've always experienced the stress. I'm able to hold the stress. Well, while they still might have like the elevated heart rate, what's different is that a more positive view of stress as just part of being human, as something that motivates us to action. This more positive view results in people's blood vessels actually staying relaxed. And so you don't have the negative health outcomes. She talks about that when we feel a stress response in our body, we can start to shift the way we think about stress by just saying, this is my body preparing me for action. Or we could just remind ourselves that this is what it is to be human. And that's the idea of, this gets at the idea of radical acceptance and curiosity, of acknowledging that stress is part of life. Nobody goes throughout the day without stress. So accepting that this is what it is to be human. And then you can even be curious, what is the stress about? Like, what does the stress want for me? What values, personal values might be activated for me right now? In the book Burnout, Nagoski, they talk about how we accumulate stress throughout our body. And what you see here, I'm not going to go through this list, but you have these different ways that we can actually release stress from our body. If we don't, and this is really something that we need to do every day, because if we don't release stress from our body, it starts to accumulate and our muscles get tense, we feel fatigued, and the mind starts to, when it recognizes that we're carrying a lot of stress, it starts to notice, hey, something's wrong here. And so this activates our threat response system. When we if we just rush from task to task all day, accumulate a lot of stress, this can actually induce a fight or flight response within our bodies. Okay, next slide. When we think about as human beings, most of our existence, we were part of hunter-gatherer societies. And when you look at the anthropology around hunter-gatherer societies, people typically worked about 6 to 8 hours a day. And so that meant that every day you had approximately 8 to 10 hours of downtime. These were opportunities for within the mindfulness literature, what would be described as being mode, where you're not goal directed, you're not working towards anything, you're just being present with your experience. You're open to what's arising. In one way, I like to think of the metaphor of sitting around like a campfire. You're not really doing anything when you're sitting around a campfire, but you are often very engaged. You're just kind of immersed in the experience. The why being mode is important is because this is when our parasympathetic nervous system is activated. This is when we're able to rest and to digest. This is when we create a sense of feeling of safety in our bodies, a connection with others. Doing mode is where we are task oriented, we're goal oriented. We have a real selective attention in what we're focusing on. When we're in doing mode, we're activating our sympathetic or arousal state. For many people that live busy professional lives, we often spend almost our entire day in doing mode. And so what we know is that when we live in doing mode, so we might be constantly running from task to task, but even when we're done working, we often continue to run through tasks in our mind, which keeps us in doing mode. If we constantly stay in doing mode, we never give an opportunity for our parasympathetic nervous system to really kick in. And so this has all kinds of health outcomes as well as negative emotional outcomes. So one practice is just being intentional about, can I give myself some downtime where I can just really immerse myself in some kind of pleasant experience or something that interests me. But also we can start to think about when we are being task oriented, can I slow down and kind of acknowledge my experiences? And then the next slide, I know I'm running a couple minutes over, so I'll try to run through this last one quickly. The science is really established at this point that self-compassion practice is increases all kinds of emotional and physical health outcomes. When we're engaging in kindness towards ourselves during moments or experiences of difficulty, it releases all kinds of positive chemicals. It activates our parasympathetic nervous system. It really taps into that caregiving system that I talked about earlier. When we do intentional gratitude practice, and I've listed some examples of gratitude practice. One that I really like is this idea of thinking of someone who has done kind acts for you at different times during your life, writing them a letter, hand delivering it, and asking for permission to read it to them. And doing this, what they've seen is that there are mental health, emotional health benefits that last up to 6 months after this one single act. So we know that gratitude increases overall psychological well-being. And then finally, savoring when we are experiencing pleasant experiences, allowing ourselves to really lean into the pleasant experiences, to become aware of it. A lot of times we experience pleasant things and we don't even acknowledge it to ourselves. We might be eating a very delicious meal and we're thinking about what we have to do at work and we're not even tasting our food. So with all these practices right here, self-compassion, gratitude, savoring, they all have emotional health benefits, but they also all have physical health benefits as well. And with that, I'll go ahead and I think we're going to open it up to responding to any questions that have already been put into the chat or that people might have.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks, Carrie, for explaining a little bit more about how all of the dimensions, or a lot of the dimensions, of health and wellness really do influence and affect that mind-body connection. I'd like to open up questions. Let's see, I'm going to visit the chat here first and see what questions have come up. Let's see, someone was asking about how to find Karen's information. If you're looking for contact information, you can always, let's see, maybe Carrie, since you have more keyboard ability right now, can you drop the health and wellness website into the chat? That would be amazing. And then also we can send out the Lazy Dietitian information in our resource email that we will send out after we're finished with our presentation today. The resource email will include relevant links, the link to this recorded session, as well as some additional resources that Eric has put together. There's a question, can we talk more about pulling weeds, planting flowers for gratitude practices? Eric, do you want to field that one? Field.
Yeah, so this is I was first made aware of this idea from the neuropsychologist Rick Hansen. And this idea that we knew as human beings that there's a strong negativity bias in our thinking. From a neuroscience perspective, it's estimated that probably about 85% of our thoughts tend to be critical in some way, either critical about our current state, what we're experiencing, critical about the world at large, critical about other people, and critical about ourselves. So there's kind of a built-in negativity bias. We also knew that really distressful events, we tend to ruminate about them. They can be, Hansen talks about that negative experiences are like Velcro, whereas positive experiences are like Teflon. They just kind of come and go. The idea of pulling weeds and planting flowers is that it's a normal human experience to think about something a memory that we find distressing or unpleasant. And so we don't want to repress that or deny that. We want to acknowledge, okay, this experience. This was really a difficult, hard experience. Maybe there's some sadness or grief here. But then following that memory up with an intentional practice of saying, bringing to your mind a memory of almost the exact opposite experience. So that if we have gone through some kind of argument with someone that we care about and we feel hurt and judged and criticized, acknowledging that to ourselves and saying, I feel so hurt right now. I feel so sad right now. But then pausing and saying, let me remember a time where I felt really cared for, really a memory when I felt really loved or appreciated, and bringing that memory into your awareness and actually allowing yourself to savor it. And what we know is that this practice, the more you do it, when your mind consolidates the memories, it kind of consolidates both these positive and negative experiences together, so that over time, really distressing life events, they start to become more neutral when we recall them. And so it's a way of bringing gratitude, the things that we really value, and to coexist with painful experiences.
Great. Thank you, Eric, for explaining that a little bit more. We've got another comment from Katie in the chat asking if you could include more information on the PERMA framework in the follow-up message. So if you want to send that to me, and then I'll make sure that it goes out to everyone who is registered, that would be great. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes left in today's session, and we invite you to put those questions in the chat. Of course, if you have questions that you think of later, or if you have questions you'd rather not put in the chat and would rather reach out to either one of us, we do have Carrie helpfully put the general website in the chat. It's hr.uky.edu/work-life-wellbeing. You can find more information about the programming that we offer for all of the aspects of health and wellness, as well as find the pathway to reach out to us for one-on-one consults. We all offer these in person, Zoom, phone, email, whichever way is easier or preferred for you to connect. All right, let's see. We've got a lot of thank yous in the chat, you all. So we really do appreciate all of you taking time out of your morning to join us this morning. It seems like a lot of people found this incredibly positive and affirming. Nice way to maybe get into Friday Eve, as we like to say over at Wellness. If anyone does have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to connect with you, and we'll stay on until folks leave. It looks like a lot of people are giving some gratitude, Carrie and Eric. So thank you so much to you both for coming together with me today, for kicking off Mental Health Month as part of the UK Health and Wellness offerings.
I also posted the YouTube channel in our chat, so that is in there as well. So you can find Karen's Lazy Dietitian as well as any stretching videos that might interest you.
Fantastic. All right, we got everything for you guys, so it's up to you to check it out. We really appreciate you joining us today. I'll go on and stop the recording. I'll stay on for a couple minutes in case anyone has any questions or comments.